The year is 1747. The most feared conqueror in Asia is sleeping in his royal tent in the desert of Khorasan. 4 of his own soldiers creep silently through the dark night toward his tent. They lift the flap. They raise their swords. He wakes up. He grabs his sword from beside his bed and fights back in complete darkness, killing 2 of the assassins before the others overwhelm him. The most powerful ruler Iran had seen in centuries died not in battle, not from disease, stabbed by the very men sworn to protect him. This is the story of how Iran's rulers die, and the pattern, across 525 years, is unlike anything in the history of any other country. They did not retire. They did not step down gracefully. They were poisoned, stabbed, shot, broken by exile, destroyed by disease, or killed by bombs falling from aircraft they never saw coming. This is that story. It begins in 1501 with a 14-year-old boy who believed he was a living god. Shah Ismail I founded the Safavid dynasty at the age of 14. His Qizilbash warriors, religious fighters who genuinely believed that dying for Ismail guaranteed the paradise, were considered invincible. For 13 years they were. Then came the Battle of Chaldiran in 1514. Ottoman artillery tore through the Qizilbash cavalry. The warriors who had never known defeat were slaughtered by cannons. Ismail barely escaped with his life. He never recovered, not physically, not spiritually. The man who had seemed to be a living god discovered he was mortal at Chaldiran. He spent the remaining 10 years of his life drinking heavily and dying slowly of a broken spirit. He died at 37, not by enemy sword, not by poison, by grief. His successor Tahmasp survived for 52 years, a remarkable achievement in a court full of people who wanted him dead. But in 1576 he died under suspicious circumstances. His physician was immediately arrested and eventually executed. Whether it was negligence or deliberate poisoning, 52-year reign ended in mystery. What followed was chaos. Ismail II had been locked in prison for 18 years, specifically because his father thought he was too dangerous. The moment he was released and crowned Shah, he proved his father right. He ordered the execution of nearly every rival in the royal family. He then died within 2 years, found dead in his chambers, showing signs of opium poisoning. His own commanders had decided he was too dangerous to keep alive. This was the Safavid pattern in its purest form. Rulers killing potential rivals, then being killed by the people they thought they controlled. The greatest Safavid was Shah Abbas I. He took power at age 16, built Isfahan into one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and transformed a collapsing empire into the dominant power in the region. He was brilliant, ruthless, and completely without sentiment. He was also the architect of his dynasty's eventual destruction. Fearing that his capable sons would overthrow him, as sons had overthrown Iranian fathers before, he had them blinded. No capable heirs. When Abbas died of natural causes in 1629, the men left to inherit his empire were simply not capable of holding it. 3 consecutive Safavid rulers after Abbas died from alcoholism. Safi I at 30, Abbas II at 33, Suleiman I after decades of disengaged drunkenness. The dynasty that had been founded by a saint king and sustained by religious warriors was being slowly destroyed by wine. The final collapse came under Sultan Hussein, a gentle, deeply pious man who had absolutely no business being a king. He was dominated by clergy. He could not make decisions. And in 1722, an Afghan force crossed the mountains and marched on Isfahan. The Safavid army, corrupted and demoralized after decades of weak rulers, fell apart. Isfahan was besieged. Sultan Hussein walked out of his own palace carrying his crown and placed it on the head of the Afghan conqueror. 4 years later, in captivity, he was beheaded. The last effective Safavid ruler, a man too gentle for the world he was born into, executed by the man who had stolen his throne. Into the chaos that followed came Nader Shah, former shepherd who rose through military genius and absolute ruthlessness to become the most feared conqueror in Asia. In 1739, he invaded India. His cavalry entered Delhi. He looted the Mughal treasury, took the peacock throne, removed the Koh-i-Noor diamond from its setting, and returned to Iran with more wealth than most empires accumulated in centuries. Then he began to destroy himself. A failed assassination attempt changed something in Nader Shah. He became paranoid, cruel, and erratic. He had his own son blinded on suspicion of plotting against. He taxed his people into starvation. His commanders and soldiers who had once worshipped him began to fear him. On the night of June 19, 1747, 4 of his officers crept into his tent. He woke up and fought back. He killed 2 of them in the darkness before the others finished him. The empire he had built across 4 decades of campaigning dissolved within hours of his death. It had been the empire of one man. When that man died, so did everything he had built. The dynasty that followed, the Qajars, began in the most violent fashion possible. Aga Muhammad Khan had been castrated as a child by an enemy trying to remove him from power. He spent the rest of his life proving that the attempt had failed. He built the Qajar Empire through merciless combat and calculated terror. He sacked cities. He built pyramids from the skulls of his enemies. In 1797, 3 days after conquering the city of Shusha, he condemned 2 servants to death for a minor infraction. The servants, knowing they would be executed in the morning, decided they had nothing to lose. That night they slipped into the royal tent and stabbed the Shah who had terrorized all of Persia. The founding logic of his own system of terror, kill your enemies before they can kill you, was turned against him by 2 men with nothing left to lose. The Qajar dynasty continued for over a century after its violent founding, but it was a century largely defined by humiliation. Russia took vast territories in 2 wars. Britain treated Iran as a buffer zone. Iranian oil was discovered in 1908, and a foreign company took control of it while giving Iran a tiny fraction of the profits. The most significant Qajar ruler was Nasser al-Din Shah, who reigned for nearly half a century. He was the first Iranian monarch to visit Europe. He was a photographer, a poet, a man who wanted to modernize but could never quite bring himself to give up the absolute power that modernization required. In 1891, he granted a British company the monopoly over Iran's entire tobacco trade. The backlash was extraordinary. A religious decree was issued against the concession. Across Iran, in an act of coordinated civil disobedience that had no precedent in Iranian history, people simply stopped smoking. The Shah was forced to cancel the concession. It was the first successful popular political movement in Iranian history. 5 years later, Nasser al-Din Shah visited the Shah Abdulazim shrine for prayers. Behind him in the crowd, a revolutionary named Mirza Reza Kermani raised an old rusty revolver and fired at close range. The Shah fell forward. His last words were, "I will rule you differently if I survive." He did not survive. Among the most haunting final words any ruler has ever spoken. The Qajar dynasty limped on for another 30 years after his assassination. Iran got its first constitution in 1906, signed by a Shah who died 5 days later. His successor bombarded the parliament building with artillery. The last Qajar Shah left Iran in 1923 on what was officially described as a medical trip. He never came back. He died in France at 32, alone and largely forgotten. The man who replaced the Qajars was Reza Shah Pahlavi, a military officer of humble origin who had risen through sheer force of will to become the most powerful man in Iran. He built roads, railways, and universities. He created a modern military. He forced a nation that had been weakening for a century to transform itself at speed. In 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran from both sides. They needed Iran's supply routes for the war against Germany. Reza Shah refused to cooperate. The invasion overwhelmed his army. He was forced to abdicate and sent to South Africa, a British-assigned residence that was comfortable, but from which he could not leave. He died there in 1944 of heart failure. The man who had built a nation died as a foreign captive, thousands of miles from the country he had transformed. His son, Mohammad Reza Shah, inherited the throne at 21. Young, inexperienced, and immediately dependent on foreign support to hold his position. In 1953, when a popular prime minister nationalized Iranian oil and the Shah briefly fled, the CIA and British intelligence engineered a coup that restored him to power. He never fully escaped the knowledge that his throne rested on foreign support rather than genuine legitimacy. In the 1970s, he received a private cancer diagnosis, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, and told almost no one. While Iran burned with revolutionary fury in 1978, the Shah was managing a collapsing political situation with a body that was failing him. He left Iran on January 16, 1979. At Mehrabad Airport, he stopped on the tarmac, bent down, and picked up a handful of Iranian soil. He held it in both hands for a moment, then boarded the plane. He never returned. Country after country refused him permanent asylum. Egypt received him. Morocco asked him to leave. The Bahamas, Mexico, Panama. The King of Kings, being treated as an unwanted guest by the entire world. He died of lymphoma in a Cairo hospital on July 27, 1980. His throne was gone. His country was transformed beyond recognition. He was 60 years old. The Islamic Republic that replaced him was built by Ayatollah Khamenei, who returned from 15 years of exile on February 1, 1979, to a crowd of millions. He declared the Islamic Republic and ruled it with absolute authority for 10 years, issuing religious decrees, prolonging a devastating 8-year war with Iraq that killed hundreds of thousands, and making Iran the most consequential Islamic state in the modern world. In June 1989, his body finally gave out. 5 heart attacks in 10 days, bleeding that could not be stopped. He died at 89. His funeral was the most chaotic in any country's history. Millions of mourners flooded the streets. The helicopter carrying his coffin was mobbed. The coffin partially fell out as people desperately reached to touch the burial shroud. Soldiers fired warning shots to restore order. The body of the Islamic Republic's founder was nearly lost in the chaos of his own burial. His successor was Ali Khamenei, a mid-level cleric who was not the intended choice, selected because the constitution was amended specifically to allow him to qualify. He had survived a bomb in 1981 that destroyed his right hand and arm. He built a 36-year reign by outlasting every challenge: U.S. sanctions, Iranian street uprisings, the assassinations of allies across the region. Then, in 2023 and 2024, everything he had built in the region began to collapse. Hamas weakened. Hezbollah's leadership was assassinated. The Syrian government fell. The strategic project of 36 years was being dismantled in months. By early 2026, Khamenei was moving between underground bunkers, appearing in public almost never. Enemy intelligence was tracking him. On February 28, 2026, a precision airstrike hit the building above the underground corridor where he was being moved. The ceiling collapsed. Fire erupted through the corridor. The 86-year-old supreme leader who had survived every assassination attempt for 45 years was killed by a bomb he never heard coming. In the same way that Nader Shah never saw the assassins in his tent. The most powerful man in Iran, killed violently in the dark by an enemy he thought he had outrun. The pattern of 525 years, complete: poison, assassination, exile, disease, airstrikes. They rose by force. They ruled by force. Almost all of them fell by force. The rulers of Iran did not retire. And history, across 5 centuries, was not kind to the people who stood at the top of it.